I want to find the integral of square root of x times square root 1 minus x dx. The first thing I'm going to do is let u equal square root of x. So then du will be 1 over 2 root x dx. So now I'm going to go back into the integral. I'm going to replace square root of x with u. And then x here, well, if u is equal to square root of x, u squared is equal to x. So I'm going to replace x with u squared. And now for dx, I'm going to solve dx over here. So I'm going to multiply the 2 root x over. So it would be 2 root x du. And notice that this is in terms of x, this is in terms of u. So I'm going to replace the square root of x with u. And that comes from over here. So dx is going to be 2u du. Okay, and now I'm going to multiply. So the u times 2u. So u times 2u will give me 2u squared. And then square root 1 minus u squared du. Next, I'm going to make a substitution. I'm going to let u be sine v. So du will be cosine v dv. So I'm going to have u squared is sine squared. And then square root 1 minus sine squared. And then du will be cosine v dv. Now, 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. So we can rewrite this as cosine squared. And then we're going to be taking the square root of that, which will be cosine. So this whole thing will just be cosine. And then we'll have cosine times cosine will give us cosine squared. So in other words, we'll have 2 sine squared times cosine squared. Next, we're going to rewrite sine squared and cosine squared. So this is the form that we're looking for. Sine squared is 1 minus cosine 2v over 2. Cosine squared is 1 plus cosine 2v over 2. So we're going to multiply these. So sine squared times cosine squared will be 1 minus cosine 2v over 2. Times 1 plus cosine 2v over 2. In the denominator, we're going to have 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. The numerator, we have a situation of difference of 2 squares. So it's going to be like a minus b times a plus b. Here, a is going to be 1. B is going to be cosine 2v. So that's just going to be a squared minus b squared. So that would just be 1 minus cosine squared 2v. So we'll come back here and replace that. So we can bring the 2 outside. And then sine squared, cosine squared will be written as 1 minus cosine squared 2v over 4. Okay. And now we want to focus again on the cosine squared 2v. So cosine squared 2v is 1 plus cosine. Now we're going to be doubling the angle. So just pay attention over here. When we had v as an angle here, we doubled it to get to 2v. Now my angle is 2v. If I double it, I get 4v. And that's going to be over 2. So we have to be very careful here. So we'll take this step by step. Ultimately, I want to replace cosine squared 2v with that. But just to make the algebra work nicely, I'm going to move the 4 outside here in the denominator. So I'll end up having 2 over 4, which is really a half integral 1 minus. Now, instead of cosine squared 2v, I'm going to replace it with 1 plus cosine 4v over 2. Okay. All right, next we're going to simplify this. So we'll have 1/2 integral 1 minus a half minus cosine 4v over 2. So what I did here was I did a couple steps. I distributed the negative, and I broke it up into 2 different fractions. So 1, the numerator of 1, and then cosine 4v is the other numerator for the fraction. So 1 minus a half is a half. And then we have cosine 4v over 2 dv. Really, in this step, we can factor out the halves here. So we can pull out a half outside, and that will just be 1/4, right? Because we'll have the halves coming out, and we'll be multiplying by the half that we have, this half. That'll give us a 1/4, and that'll be 1 minus, and here I dropped the 4v. So 1 minus cosine 4v dv. And move that over here. That'll be 1/4. And then the antiderivative 1 is just v. Cosine v, well, we have negative cosine v, so that would be negative sine 4v. And by chain rule, we have to divide by 4. And then because we're doing the integral here, we need the plus the constant. Next, we want to replace the v's. So we made a substitution previously on the v, so let's go back. We said u is equal to sine v. Okay. So let's do some work here. So if u is sine v, that means that v has to be the inverse sine of u. Okay, so we're going to replace this v with that. Next, we want the sine 4v. Well, I don't have sine 4v. So we're going to be a little clever here. Sine 4v is sine of 4, and then the v, so this v is going to be replaced with this v right here. So it'll be sine 4 times inverse sine of u. So let's make that change. So I'm going to have 1/4. V is inverse sine u. minus sine 4 inverse sine u over 4, and then that's plus the constant. One last thing is we have a u, so we want to make that substitution back. So we said u, let's see, u was square root of x. Okay, so u was square root of x over here. So let's make that final substitution and we should be good to go. Okay, so we're going to rewrite this as 1/4 inverse sine of square root of x minus sine 4 times inverse sine square root of x over 4, and then plus c.